Hello and welcome to today's episode of Courage Permission Slip. I, of course, am your host, Kia, and today I'm so pleased that I get to welcome Belma McCaffrey to the show. But before we get started, let me tell you just a little bit more about her. Belma is the CEO and founder of Work Bigger, a career coaching platform for dissatisfied high achievers who want to find their purpose. Prior to Work Bigger, she spent more than 10 years in media and strategy roles at companies like the Associated Press and Conde Nast. Belma is also a refugee and a mom, and her work has been featured in Forbes, Fortune, Thrive, and other platforms. Welcome to the show, Belma.
Thank you so much for having me, Kia. I'm so excited to be here.
Good. I'm excited that you are here, and you and I connect on so many levels because I also know that you are a fellow type A and high achiever, AKA overachiever. And, you and I were talking about this before we officially started, but I had seen one of your LinkedIn posts that resonated so deeply with me because you were talking about this balance of knowing that you needed a break so badly, but then also you started feeling this anxiety bubbling up about taking the break, right? Like, and as entrepreneurs, I totally get this where you're like trying to balance between resting and healing and, oh, but also who else is going to do this work? So I'm really curious to hear from you, Belma. How did you reconcile the two like really intense emotions of needing that time out, but then also, oh my gosh, I need to take a time out. Now what do I do? How did you balance that?
Yeah. So I'll give a little bit of context. That was right before my family and I went on a 5-week trip to the East Coast. We're living in California right now, and we planned this big trip to see our parents and our siblings and our friends. And I was really excited to go back home and see everyone. And, I knew there was a lot of work coming up. And I just remember observing the dialogue in my mind and hearing myself. And it was like, God, I'm so tired. I'm really exhausted. I need a break. When is a break coming? Like this, I was getting to that point when it just, it had been a lot of back-to-back things.
Sure.
And then on the other hand, I observed myself like thinking about this 5-week trip and feeling like, oh my God, I can't really work the same way that I work. I can't work a full day. I'm not going to have childcare. Like, what does that mean?
Right.
And then I just noticed, I'm like, well, this is interesting. I'm like needing the break and I'm stressed out about the break. So the way I, just reconciled those two emotions is first, I just let myself observe them, really just to be with them and to notice how I had these two conflicting parts. There's a part of me that needed to rest, and the high achiever is really good at doing. Like that's her job. She, is good at moving from one thing to the next. And she, gets through her to-do list and she does all the things, but she needed to chill out and take a break. So that was the first thing I did. I just noticed that, and having that awareness allowed me to pause, and I gave myself permission. I said, I am taking these 5 weeks. Within that 5 weeks, I had planned like 2 weeks of like no working, maybe I think I had like 1 call scheduled. I was like, that is all I'm going to do.
Sure.
I'm going to do that, do that one day, and then that's it. And it meant like, not like silencing the high achiever, because that's like very strong, but just being okay with the discomfort that came up with that part. And just allowing the discomfort.
Yeah. So, and I talked about this in other episodes. So in my coach training, we call those parts the shadow. And so our way of dealing with that is our pathway to alignment is called embracing the shadow. And because I am very aware of and in touch with my high achiever part, and my high achiever part is very afraid of taking time out because she's afraid that she won't be able to get momentum back. So while I really love taking time out, I love taking breaks, I love doing nothing. And I'm one of those people, which I think you can relate to this too. I'm one of those people that does really well at 0 or really well at 100 miles an hour, but like anywhere between like the 40 and 70 mile per hour zone is really, I don't do well at all. So it's
Yeah, you're
either
like, what is this?
it's all or nothing, right? Like I don't know how to do things halfway. And so that part is really afraid of being at 0 and oh, can I get back up to 100 miles an hour? Because that part is so used to that pace. And just like you said, it's used to the back to back, the go, go, go. Ooh, look at my calendar is full for the day. Like yes, right? And that's not healthy. And I know you talk about burnout a lot and, really, caring for that high achiever part through it so that you can succeed. And I mean, it takes a lot of work to shift that relationship with yourself or with that part of yourself.
Yeah.
So I really, really appreciate that. And I was telling you and for you, the listener, I was telling Belma that I had this experience earlier this year where I had the pipeline packed at the end of 2021, ready to go in 2022. And when 2022 hit, Omicron was at its height and all the things that I had packed in the pipeline had fallen away. And so, but I also was sick. I had been sick for about a month and I was constantly in conflict with the part of myself that really needed to do nothing, because I just didn't feel well. But then, you as an entrepreneur will know this, Belm, or understand this, that like that other part was like, oh, but if I don't do anything, how am I going to keep the business going?
Yeah. It's like that fear voice pops up.
Yeah.
And it's like, what's going to happen? There's so much uncertainty, right? So you have to figure it out.
Right.
At least that's what that voice is saying.
Yeah.
I totally get that.
Absolutely. And I'm going to take my glasses off because my eyes hurt. So, as you know, and so just in that piece of the conversation, Belma, I heard you give yourself a number of courage permission slips. And as you know, that's what this show is all about. So I would love to start there and talk to you, Belma, or hear from you of when you hear the word courage, what does it mean to you? How do you define it?
I love that word. Yeah. Courage to me is going into the places that scare you, right? So you talk a little bit about the shadow. We have a similar framework at Work Bigger. We talk about the three selves, which are you familiar with that?
No, but I want you to talk about it.
I'll explain it. Yeah. So the three selves is basically, it's rooted in the idea that we're all essentially good, right? And that when we're born into our healthy self. And this is the part of us that easily expresses our needs, easily loves. And, it's just like, if you think of a baby, right? They just cry when they need to, they ask for help. But as we get older, there is, usually a trauma that happens, and it doesn't have to be something big like abuse. It could be something small. It's essentially what happens is a separation and a wound, like we experience a wound. And to help us cope with, that's where the second self is born, which is the wounded self. And to help us cope with that wound, the survivor self is born. And our survivor self likes to make sure that we're always safe, that we're always taken care of, right? And our survivor self and our healthy self tend to look very different. The survivor has all these strategies that will help to ensure our success, right? That will ensure that, we're making money and doing all of the things that keep us alive. So just like you said, it's about embracing that shadow, the healing, and I think courage comes into play when you are willing to look at all parts of you, right? The parts of you that you quote unquote don't like, right? Or that maybe scare you. I think that's what courage really is, when you're willing to go there and you're willing to look at the experiences that did wound you, right? And you acknowledge those for what they are, and you learn to embrace all parts of you. I think that's that's super important. And to me, I think that's very courageous.
Yeah. Yeah, I really do agree with you, Belma, and I talk about this a lot because a lot of my coaching, I often tell my clients it's going to get worse before it gets better when we first start working together, because this, for many people, is the first time that they have had to pull back the curtain. This is the first time that they're really having to build a different relationship with the fear, right? To build a different relationship or build awareness of the part of themselves selves that feel uncomfortable, or that they don't really like, or that they don't want other people to know about. And I too think that that's courageous, because it's easier to step over those things. While it doesn't feel good, the stress and the strife of the hiding doesn't feel good, but it's much easier to step over that and ignore it and just trying to be in survival mode than it is to look at those dark corners of your life to say, I'm going to shine a light on you so that we can expose this and move past it. It is more courageous to do that than it is to be in a, like, I can't see you, I can't hear you. So I really, really do align with what you were just saying, Belma.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's easier in the short term, right?
Yes.
And in the long term, you really like that starts to build up eventually. You start to feel the pain and the struggle from not doing that inner work.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Yeah. And what I have found is when people in the short term will do, all the Band-Aid things, oh, I'm just going to take this free workshop here. Oh, I'm just going to do this thing. Or, oh, I'm going to show up just to one coaching session and then I'm never coming again. But over the long term, you keep just doing those Band-Aids and stepping in and stepping out and stepping back in for another minute and stepping back out. Over the long term, you're going to see this compounding effect of not really doing the work. And so what ends up happening is that you end up doing more damage than you think you're doing by just doing the little things, because you're not really getting to the core or the base of what's happening.
Yeah, totally. You're
Ooh.
staying surface level, right? And you're not fully committing to that change that needs to happen.
Yeah, exactly. So, and Belma, I do have a question for you, but I am sure that it's going to come up. So I'm gonna keep going, but I may come back to this. But when you talked about the trauma piece, and I'm just thinking about part of your story that we've talked about, but in fact, I'm just gonna ask it now. So let's just dive in. So I remember when we were getting to know each other and we talked about, and this is in your bio too, about you being a refugee. And I remember you telling me the story of being bullied, right? Because you were different than others. So can you talk a little bit about what happened and what that trauma was that you experienced, and how you've exhibited courage to deal with that?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So I moved to the United States. We left, I was born in Albania. I left when I was 7. You couldn't come directly to the US. So we lived in Italy for a few months and then came to the US eventually. And we're refugees. And I didn't know the language. I started 3rd grade here. I remember that first day when my parents dropped me off. I was terrified. I couldn't communicate. My dad was trying to teach us English when we were little kids in Albania, but it's like, how attentive are you when you're a 7-year-old and your dad's trying to teach you a different language? So it was tough. And as I, continued in 3rd grade, I loved learning. Like I always have. I'm a huge learner, and I always had that high achiever in me. Even then, I wanted to do well. So I was really committed to studying. I wanted to get all the A's. I also, had glasses and was a pretty awkward looking for, little girl, for an 8-year-old. And I also loved people. enjoyed putting myself out there and trying new things. So as I continued in school, I found myself always trying out for things and putting myself out there, and it wasn't always well received. And trying to be a straight A student and wearing glasses and all of these things, I just was picked on, very easily from the moment I moved here. And it was really hard. It was really, really tough. And I would say I experienced that for maybe about 6 years. So from third grade until high school. So maybe 5 or 6 years. Yeah.
That's a pretty long stretch of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was tough. It was challenging. Going to school became really hard. And I didn't necessarily tell my parents. Like, I think I told them once. And I always wonder that. I'm like, why didn't I talk about it more?
That was going to be my next question. Do you know why you didn't say anything?
I don't know. I think it could be that we were in this situation where my parents were trying to navigate being in this new country. They didn't speak the language. So maybe deep down, I felt like maybe they can't really help me. And not that I remember I did tell my mom once about what was happening, and she was really upset. And my parents are wonderful. I'm very close with them. So I'm sure if they listen to this, they're going to be like, oh no, but it wasn't anything that was their fault. I think there was just a lot going on in our family at that time. It was such a big transition. And my parents, I think I could almost like sense them trying to also fit in as adults and make a life for us. And, there's 3 of us. So they just had a lot going on at the time. So I think, I kept it in, and that had a big impact. I don't think I realized what there was this one specific situation, which I'll share here. So when I was little, I really wanted to sing, and I didn't have the best voice, but I was in the chorus, and I decided to try it for a solo, and I'm in 4th grade. And I remember like practicing, and I go up in front of the class and I start singing, and the kids just start laughing, and I run out, and I know it's so sad. And I'm like crying. I know it was really sad. And I didn't remember this event, or maybe I remembered it, but I like buried it deep down. And it wasn't until I started on this path of building my business that all of this stuff started coming back. And ultimately what was happening all those years, it was, rejection after rejection, like putting myself out there and getting rejected or getting laughed at. And building a business requires you to put yourself out there. And it required me to really look at this part. I mean, I still struggle with it. It's, I can't say I have fully healed it, because I realize, anytime I have to like get to the next level, I have to look at that part that is really worried about getting up in front of people and getting laughed at and getting rejected. So that had a huge impact. And I didn't realize, I think when I started on this path of entrepreneurship, I realized that as a kid, I was always trying to be seen and be heard. And I wanted to like step into my full potential even then. And, it didn't work out that I couldn't sing, but it was like building this business became like, it gave me the opportunity to start healing that and to do it now as an adult, and to, to like really face that fear, and to face all the years that I dealt with that. So.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that journey that that impacted you so deeply and for so long, and how it still shows up, right? And this is what it's so important for people to understand, that are willing to exhibit that courage to start looking at, peeking behind the curtain and starting to make change, is that it takes a long time to get to be the version of ourselves that we are right now. And when it doesn't take the first couple times when you're trying to turn the corner, don't give up. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because it took you a long time to become who you are now. And it's going to take a long time to undo that or redo or shift in order to become this new version. And I always like to say, like, we're all on this journey together. And the only time the journey ends is when we leave this world. So we're
Yes.
all, to use Michelle Obama's
Yes.
book title, we're all becoming,
Yes.
we're all always
Mm,
becoming. And,
yeah.
and it's whether you allow yourself to become or not, I think is the
That's so
key.
beautiful.
Mm,
Yeah. I
mm,
have the chills hearing that.
mm,
Um, it's so true. Like it really is a journey. I'm thinking now as you're sharing, we're in Work Bigger, we're running Work Bigger Leader, which is this 9-month program. And essentially what it does, it asks you to step into your full potential. And it asks our members and clients to look at these parts. And
mhm.
it truly is courageous work
Yes.
because it's not easy. It's like, yeah, you have to, it's kind of like you said, like, what is the other option? Right?
Right.
It's like the other option, I think, is more painful down the
Mhm,
line.
mhm,
And I
mhm.
think what's interesting, like the story that I shared, right? And even what I see with my members and clients as they're doing this work, it's so valuable. Like you can use that. Like I feel like, how do I say this? Like this rejection piece, I connect so much when people have a fear of that. It's
Mhm,
like, I know that. I know what that's
mhm.
like. And we can use these parts of ourselves and bring them into the world and integrate them with the work that we're doing
Yeah.
if we want to.
Right.
If we want to, if we
Yeah.
feel called to do that, we don't
Mhm,
have to,
mhm,
right?
mhm.
Um, but for me, I think that's what has brought me to this work,
Yeah.
because I really value the journey of that, and
Yeah.
I think the healing is so important.
Yes, yes, it is. It is. And I really like that you positioned it as a choice. That if you want to use this, you don't have to, but like you
Yeah,
said, there are two options here, right?
yeah,
There is, keep doing the same thing and hoping for a different result, or you can do something a little different to get something a little different.
yeah,
Real love that, Belma. Love that. So we've already kind of been talking about this in some of the beautiful stories that you shared, but I would love for you to, kind of create this bigger picture of how did giving yourself permission to be courageous, how did that really shift the course of your life? Because it sounds like with you starting Work Bigger, that was you really like leaning into these dark corners of your life that you've been dealing with so long. So how did all of that really shift things for you?
yeah. Um, well, it didn't happen right away. Like I
Hmm.
started
Yeah.
working, when I was 22, and I had like a lot of ambition and drive, but I wasn't connecting with the work that I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually I started to feel this pull towards doing something different. And my mom, I'll say, I won't say my parents, my dad, I think more supportive. My mom wasn't really supportive of it. Like she didn't want me to go off on my own. I
Mm-hmm.
think because my parents grew up in a communist country where they were fighting to survive every single day. So like their priority for me was like, just survive and, make sure that you have the security that we didn't have. And that was really challenging because, I admire my parents, and I had this other voice pulling me in this direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it was hard, right? But I made the choice to listen to that voice. And I remember that time. It wasn't easy, and I definitely had some arguments with my mom. But she's on board now. She
Yeah,
sees
yeah,
that this is my path.
yeah.
But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, so, and I'll share because you talking about listening to that voice. And for me, when I first got on the entrepreneurial path, It was back shortly after 9/11. And, but it wasn't my idea. Let's put it like this. Similar to you, I was working in a career that I was good at, and it was fine. Like, I had fun. I love the people that I work with, but I wasn't connecting with it. I knew really early on at the early part of my marketing career that that was not where I wanted to end my career, but I didn't know what else to do, right? Like, because growing up, it was you go to high school, you go to college, you get a degree in something, and you work in that degree, work a job using that degree until you retire, and then that's it.
Yeah.
So that's what I thought. And, this is pre social media, right? So we didn't have all the entrepreneurs in our faces all the time, every day, all day long. So I didn't even know it was an option. I didn't know it was a thing. And I remember after work one night, I was sitting having beers for happy hour with my dad. And I was going on and on about, oh, I can't stand this, like kind of like the proverbial crying in my beer. And my dad said, maybe you should start your own business because you've never liked anyone telling you what to do. And I was like, what?
Like,
What do you mean start my own business? Right? Like, people do that? I mean, I didn't know, but I knew there was a voice. There was something in me that was like, no, this ain't it, Kia. This is not it. But I literally did not know what else to do. I didn't know what else to do. And it wasn't until that conversation that I realized that something else was possible. So I think, for you, the giving yourself permission comes with letting yourself listen to and take a step because you've heard that voice. Even if you don't know what to do next, even if you didn't know that there were other options, I think the permission that leads to the shift is you saying, kind of like what we've already talked about, of you realizing, I don't love this. I don't love this. And there's this pull, and you could very easily have made the choice to say, pull, schmull, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, or pull, what's the pull? What could that be? Right? Like, just setting the intention to get more information, right? So for me, I feel like you answer that question even without having gone down that full journey. Does that resonate with you?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And what you hit on too, it's like the possibility piece, right? It's like we don't know what's possible in that moment. And what I'm hearing is like, if you like just take that first step, right? And then the next step, the road could start to unfold. I love that you called that out, because I think that's a big piece. And I think oftentimes that is why it's extra scary, because we're not connected to that possibility. It's a lot harder to approach things from that mindset, right? We go immediately to the fear. It's just how our minds are wired. But I think, to your point too, it's like you didn't have any examples at the time, right? Which makes it even more challenging. So I think it's so cool that, your dad like said that to you and opened up that door for you. That's so beautiful.
Yeah, because I mean, otherwise I probably would have stayed at that job doing that same exact thing, and then just going from thing to thing, hoping that I would feel differently about it, which I kind of did that when I came back from having my own business, but because I had that little taste, I knew that there was something more, or that there were more possibilities. But it's what you decide to do with that awareness. But I like to tell people, awareness is the first most important step, is getting the awareness and then deciding to do something with it.
Yes, 100%. I think the awareness is so big. Yeah.
So Belma, you talked about this a little bit. And two fears I hear a lot that you kind of talked about is, this fear of putting yourself out there and then the fear of rejection, right? Which we deal with, all the time.
Yep.
But what fears do you notice pop up for you now? I mean, obviously, we talked about the
Yeah.
anxiety that came with being away from your work for so long, but what fears do you notice that pop up for you right now?
Yeah. It what's present for me even now, often it goes back to that fear of rejection, but I have a fear of not being liked. You know, I
Mm,
I it doesn't feel good. I want other people to like me. Like
yeah,
that's
right.
and why is that, right? If we like pull on that thread,
Mhm,
it's because being liked and loved
mhm,
offers that sense of safety. And I
yeah.
think at the end of the day, right, that's what our minds are doing.
Mhm,
Um, so yeah, I still find myself dealing with that. That comes up with clients.
mhm,
It comes up
mhm,
with, anytime I have to do a speaking gig
mhm,
or whatever it is.
mhm,
And yeah, that's like a very real thing.
mhm,
And I have to, when it happens, I really have to pause and check in. It doesn't always look like fear of rejection, right? It's not so clear
mhm,
in that moment. And it's usually disguised in anger or something else, and I really have to pause, be like, why am I having this reaction? Like, what is happening here? So it's not,
mhm,
so I say this because even though we talked about it, I think it's very layered. And I find myself, I still have to do a lot of work sometimes to really recognize that that's what it is and that it's not, it's masked sometimes
mhm,
into something
mhm.
else.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there is, I can't remember who I first heard say this, but once I really sat with it, it made sense. And now I can see it because I'm doing the work for myself, right? Like just because we're coaches doesn't mean that we are like, ooh, like we have it all figured out.
Totally.
I
Yeah.
I was talking to my therapist and I told her that I was really hard on myself because I felt like a fraud. I felt like, oh my God, like I'm dealing with the things that my clients are dealing with. What I don't have any business being a coach. And she was like, oh, look at
Mhm.
you thinking that you're better than everyone else. I mean, she really had to like
Wow.
real talk me. She was like, and she didn't say this, but it really
Wow.
was this like, how dare you think that you're above
Mm.
struggle? How dare you think you're above needing help, right? Like she's like, this is why therapists need therapists. We don't, just
Yeah.
because you are equipped to help people doesn't mean
Yeah.
that you're not going to have your own struggles and problems. And that's something that I still have to work on. That, you know, hey, like I said, we're all becoming, right? Like we don't all have it figured out,
Yeah.
um but I totally, that resonates with me of what you said about this, like not being liked. And oh, I know where I was going with it, that anger is a secondary emotion. And see, I tease it and then I never said it.
Yes.
That anger is a secondary emotion, and when you can pause, just as you said, and take a step back to be like, okay, what's underneath that? And usually it's, you know, it's an initial emotion of like hurt or
Hmm.
disappointment or
Yes.
something like that. And when because I do get very frustrated about certain things, usually it has to do with social media, but that's another that's a whole other topic of conversation. But when I peel back that layer from the frustration and the anger and the annoyance, it's usually this disappointment of, oh my gosh, like I put this thing out into the world and it did, like no one cares, right? Like
Yeah.
no, people are like, oh, that sucked,
Yeah.
right? And I don't know that they're saying that. That's the story that I'm telling myself.
The
But
story. Yes.
right.
The
And
story.
the
Yep.
story is a doozy. And I
Yep.
love one thing that I share in leadership trainings that I do. I love sharing this prompt to help people manage their stress a little differently is the prompt of, what am I assuming right now? What am I assuming about this, right? Because we see someone's facial reaction or lack of reaction, or we see an email that maybe has the air of a tone, and we immediately go into storytelling about it. And we create these whole worlds and scenarios without even really knowing what's actually true. So that's one of my favorite prompts, is what am I assuming right now? Or what are you assuming right now? Because that storytelling can be so dangerous and so harmful to ourselves.
Yes. Can I share what's coming up for me?
Please.
As we're talking about the stories, and are you familiar with nonviolent communication? I am so obsessed with it. And one of the first steps in NVC, like when you're communicating, right, is to state the facts and to state the data, or like what actually happened in the situation. And if you like hear yourself, like, we don't think in facts, we don't think in data, we think in judgment. Right. We're always creating story and making evaluation. So it is so challenging. And I think about, like, the emotions that are stirred up in us because we think in judgment, and the inaccuracies, right, that then happen in relationship and in communication because of that. So I think that is such a powerful thing, like really recognizing when we are in the storytelling, when we are in the judgment, and inviting ourselves to shift to the facts, right? To truly consider just that. And then to notice the difference in how we feel. Like when we're in the story, right, we're so activated, like there's so much going on, right? It's like we're fired up and there's a lot happening. And then when we're in the facts, it's like just kind of like dull, you know?
Right. Yes. It's so anticlimactic.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. But it's so fascinating. So I love that you're calling out the stories, because a lot happens.
Yes.
And a lot of it isn't real.
Yes.
It's not real.
Yes. Yes. Ooh. Oh, I love this, Belma. I love having this conversation with you. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So, you talked about ways that you try to manage that fear of really pausing and, trying to pull back the layers. And so when you fear, or the fears that are present for you, those things that are in the way that kind of want to keep you safe, want to keep you in your comfort zone. And knowing that you are finding ways to actively deal with this, where do you still find that you have to give yourself permission to keep stepping out of your comfort zone? Because as we know, like, it's a muscle that you have to build, right? Like, it's not like, oh, this is what I'm afraid of, now I can deal with this. It's this like constant thing. So I'm really interested to hear where you're still having to push that line for yourself.
Yeah, I think in many parts of my business still, and many parts in my personal life. In my business, it means continuing to level up as a coach, working with clients who are, where like I can't immediately hear or see like what is happening, like really, which challenges me to stay even more present, to listen even more, to hold space even more, and also to continue taking risks. It's so that is important, and I need to keep doing that, and it's challenging, when I'm in those moments. And then in my personal life too, with my kids, how I show up with them, with my husband, like continuing to, when I'm triggered, to pause and to listen, or to go and process my anger, right? It comes up with my kids too, it's like, so to go and process that, to go and deal with that. But I feel like it's a part of life, Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And I relate to that too, because I am one of those people that it's I can't I can react in the moment, but my mouth and my brain, like the the time between, I can really think through. And I just, for instance, like even in work situations where we'll be, because everything, so much of our lives has been spent on Zoom, right? And I'm
Yeah.
one of those people, like I have to have a piece of paper and be able to write things down and like map things out. Like I'm very analog in that way. And I've been in work situations where, everyone, and I can, oh, Mural, right? There's this tool called Mural, and everyone's like using stickies, and I just sit there frozen because I feel this anxiety coming up, because I'm not one of those people that can process on screen, that I
Mm.
can see the information and process it right away. I have to step away. And the same is in stressful situations with my husband, or things of that nature. Like I really need to step away and let kind of like my brain come back together, so I can really think through all the pieces, and kind of get my argument together, right? And
Yeah.
not like argument for the sake of arguing, but I need time to
Yeah.
process and come back from the trigger, right? So I relate
Totally.
to that very deeply, Belma.
Yeah.
Mm, mm.
Yeah.
So, Belma, you've shared some really important insights and really beautiful stories, and that there is someone who is listening to our conversation right now and is thinking, you guys are coaches, you're figuring it out, you have all the tools. I can't take action. I can't deal with those things. And so for
Yeah.
that person who has a goal, they want to level up in some way. Maybe they want to level up in their business, maybe they want to level up in their career, or level up in their personal life. But the fear is too big and it's too
Mm.
important. What is your guidance for that person in order to move forward and take action?
Yeah. A couple of things come to mind. One, what can support look like?
Mm,
What can support look like? The fear is never going to go away.
mhm.
The fear is like there along for the ride. I like to say, like, let's befriend the fear,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
It's not going anywhere. So how do we work with it? How do we allow it? And what does support look like? Because doing that is difficult, right? And I want to like really acknowledge those feelings, and like
Mhm,
that's real,
mhm,
right? So what
mhm,
does support look like? You don't have to do it alone.
mhm.
You don't have to do, and it could just be like taking one small step today. What is
Yeah.
that baby step
Yeah.
that allows you to see what's possible, that allows you, right, to walk,
Mhm,
that
mhm,
like to work, to
mhm,
lean more into your healthy self, right?
mhm,
At the end of the
mhm.
day, um, what does that look like for you? So it doesn't have to be anything big. It's leaning on other people and just taking like one small baby step.
I really like what you said, and I would love to talk about this a little bit more, about what can support look like, because support can look like a lot of different things at different times, because support
Mhm.
doesn't always have to be a person. Support can be a physical change in location.
Mm.
Support could be a song or music, right? Support could be doing a video with your friend, right? I use
Yeah.
Marco Polo a lot.
Yes.
That's what support could look like.
Yeah.
Support could be drinking a huge glass of water, right?
Yes.
And I like to say, because sometimes the tools that you use in your toolbox don't always work, right? Like the
Hmm.
tools don't work the same all the time. And so sometimes you have to sharpen the tools, or you have to put that tool down and pull up a different tool. And so I would love to hear from you, how do you decide what support looks like for you, in those moments where maybe something isn't working as well as it used to, or you're kind of in this this paralysis from fear. How do you decide what support you need, Belma?
Yeah. I try many different things. One thing I always go to or try, right? It may not always work in that moment, but is journaling and like really doing a brain dump of my thoughts and seeing what is happening in my brain. I think it really helps to get it down on paper. Labeling my feelings helps. I know not everybody has that skill that requires, that is a skill. Also reaching out to, I love that you said you use Marco Polo with your friend. I have a group of friends. We call ourselves the OGs, and we we're on WhatsApp and we send each other like voice memos all day. And my husband will hear me like walking around listening to my voice memos, but that's us leaning on each other. Like that is my community. They're my people, and I rely on them a lot. It could be going for a walk with my husband. It could be crying.
Yes.
Right. Like really like crying and letting it out, going to bed early if I need to. So many different things. A meditation, right? And like closing my eyes and listening to a soothing song and letting myself nap for 20 minutes. Right. Those are all things that I do. And I've done all that this week already. So it's like, you know, those, and they help like that. Those are some examples.
So I, I don't ask questions and then I don't answer my own questions. So yesterday in particular, I was in one of those days where I had created this really unrealistic to-do list for myself. And a long to-do list of big things, Belma, big things that looking back, I'm like, you ding dong, like, what were you thinking? Are you kidding me? Do you really thought you were going to get all these things done today? And so I started, and some of them are like time sensitive things. And so I started spinning out because I felt like I was telling my friend on Marco Polo, I told her, I said, I feel like I'm racquetballing. I felt like a racquetball where I just was off of every wall because I'm looking at the list. I was getting paralyzed. Oh my gosh, I haven't done anything today, which by the way, I ended up marking off quite a bit off my list. And even still, I was in this really like emotional, I love your word, activated state. And so I didn't feel a full-on anxiety attack coming on, but I could feel myself starting to like ratchet up. I like to use the visual because everyone gets this. Most people get it. I don't want to be assuming, but in cartoons, you know, when a character is getting mad, sometimes they show them like a temperature gauge where like the red is going up. That's how I felt. I could feel the temperature gauge going up. And so I have, I'm looking over at my bookcase, like you can see it. I have this thing called an anti-anxiety notebook where you can write out what's happening. You know, the feelings wheel is in there where you can pull out like, what emotions are you feeling right now? What's the intensity of those emotions? And then like, what is the word is escaping me right now, but you know, what mode are you in? It's like, are you in all or nothing thinking? Are you self-blaming? Like all of those things. And so I had to do a brain dump yesterday, Belma.
What is this book? It sounds amazing.
I will send you a link and I'll put the link in the show notes. It's the anti-anxiety notebook. It's developed by therapists. It's built on or based on CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And it just takes you through this process, not unlike what we were talking about earlier, of making what you're dealing with real, getting it out of the spin cycle and getting it down on paper to say, this is what's happening. What else could be true? You know, like all that. And so even though like I'm trained in that and, you know, both personally and professionally, I still have to use it on myself. And so I had to do that yesterday. And I had to decide, okay, I've got to step away from my desk. I've been staring at a screen too long. I've been staring at this to-do list too long. I did the brain dump, and I pulled in a tactic from James Clear, writer of Atomic Habits, and it was,
Yes.
I upped it to two things. What are two small things that I can commit to right now? And I
Mm.
took two things from my list and I did them literally in a matter of 10 minutes. I've been
Wow.
spinning out about these things all day. In 10
Wow.
minutes, I did these two things, left my house, went to the park, and I turned my phone off. I didn't look at my phone for the rest of the day or the rest of the evening. And I went to bed early, and it made such a huge difference. But if I hadn't taken the time
Yeah.
out to say, ooh, I'm about to go off the deep end. If I hadn't taken that awareness and done
Yeah.
something with it, we may be having a different conversation today. So yeah, I mean, I really appreciate you letting me talk with you about the tools that we can use to support ourselves, because
Yeah.
it's not the same thing all the time.
No. And it sounds like for you, giving yourself that space to really process what was going on
Mhm.
allowed you to move so much more quickly and
Yes.
like go to the park,
Yes.
and do the
Yeah.
nice thing for yourself
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
you got your stuff done. Like you got two things done so much faster.
Yes. Yes.
That's
Two
awesome.
things that, which by the way, had been on my list all week. They had been on my list all week. And it
Yeah.
took me coaching myself through that moment to get them done. And it took
Yeah.
me, again, 10 minutes, if even that, if
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. That's amazing.
We
That's
make, so
amazing.
talking about the storytelling, Belma, I mean, don't we create all these stories and dread and procrastinate about these things that are on our list, but when we actually decide to do them, they
Mhm.
never take as long, or they're never that as big of a deal as we make them out to be. Would you agree with that?
Yes. Oh, 100%. A hundred
Mhm,
percent. It's like
mhm.
oftentimes it's the energy, right? And the thoughts and the worry underneath that
Yes,
task that
yes.
is weighing us down, not
Mhm,
necessarily the
mhm,
task itself.
mhm.
So,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Oh, Belma,
Yeah.
I could talk to you for 2 more hours about this, but
Yeah.
we will land this plane. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your personal stories and sharing your insights and just being in conversation with me about your personal and your professional experiences. Thank you so much, Belma.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. I've loved this discussion, and yeah, I just am honored to be on your show and to have these like really important conversations.
Mhm,
And thank you so
mhm.
much.
Thank you. Thank you. And, and I will say, so I keep saying I'm going to land this plane and then I talk about something else, but this, and you and I have covered this a couple times today in different ways, but that's really one of my, it is the goal for why I wanted to start Courage Permission Slip. Is in all of my coaching sessions, I kept hearing how fear was such a big reason
Mm.
why people weren't taking steps, and then the shame that comes with that, right? And I
Yeah.
just wanted to be in conversations with people from different walks of life, from different experiences, different career positions, to normalize these feelings, because so often people feel like they're the only ones that are experiencing that. And it's no, everyone, as you said, the fear doesn't go away. So how can we shift our relationship with it? And this is really what the conversations, and certainly our conversation, can help move the needle for people on. So again, I really thank you for being on here to talk with me
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. My pleasure. And yeah, we're all human,
Yeah.
and we're not alone. And
Mhm.
there's a lot of, we have different struggles, and at
Yes.
the core, right, we're all wanting
Yes.
the same thing. So
Yes.
thank
Yes.
you for creating the space
Mhm.
and these conversations. And yeah, I'm just really honored. to be a
Thank
part of
you.
it.
Thank you. Thank you. So Belma, where can people get in touch with you and or learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so you can find us at workbigger.co. Yeah, we have free resources on there. We have a free class called What's My Superpower? So if you're looking to land on that, check that out. But yeah, workbigger.co is our website.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I will include all of your links in the show notes, including the link to the How to Find Your Superpowers class.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning in to today's episode of Courage Permission Slip. If you have found us on YouTube, please make sure that you like and subscribe so that you can be alerted when new episodes are available. And if you found us on your favorite podcast platform, please make sure that you rate and review so that you can make it easier for others to find and enjoy this content as well. That's it for today's episode. Thank you for following along. And until the next time, make sure that you are making your dreams bigger and more important than your fears. We'll see you on the next episode.